I'm Amira Davis, mom of 3, wife, daughter, sister, and a business owner with my husband. But this right here, this is mine, and it matters because every woman deserves a place that's just hers. If you've ever felt yourself changing and wondered who you're becoming, pull up a chair. We're getting honest about all of it, the shifts, the questions, the stuff we usually keep quiet. Welcome in. Do you ever notice how midlife has a way of showing you the pick a lane advice you got early in your career doesn't actually fit who you've become? A lot of us are navigating multiple roles, from corporate and founder to leader and caregiver, professional and community builder, and we're realizing the multi-hyphenate isn't a problem to solve, it's how we're built. Today, we're talking about what it actually takes to lead across multiple spaces in life and why you need people around you who get all of you. So welcome back to the Shifted Podcast. This is actually the first one of the year. I stopped in December and I took a month off and now I'm back. So you know how we start. Grab whatever's in your glass, lift it up, and cheers to showing up for another real conversation about what's actually happening in our lives. I'm drinking coffee today and water. I'm double-fisted. Teddra, what you got?
I have protein water.
Oh, I love protein water. And it's good. I need to find one without an aftertaste. So you'll have to give me some stuff.
Clear protein. It's good stuff.
Okay, good. So if you're navigating multiple professional identities or you're realizing that the conventional wisdom about focus doesn't fit how you're actually living, this one's for you. So I think a lot of us reach a point in midlife when we realize that we're not just one thing. We're corporate, entrepreneur, we're leader and caregiver like we talked about. We're building multiple things at once. And the advice that we got, pick a lane, might be a great thing then, but it just doesn't fit anymore. And here's what I've learned. The women who are thriving in midlife aren't the ones who simplified themselves down to one identity. They're the ones who figured out how to hold multiple roles with intention without burning out or losing themselves in the process. Teddra Thomas Burgess is a technology executive, board member, and founder of Chasing Outcomes, executive coaching firm, Edit. She spent over 25 years in C-suite roles at Google Cloud, Hewlett-Packard, and Tanium, leading sales, partnerships, and businesses development. At Google Cloud, she spearheaded a 90% year-over-year increase in cloud consumption and scaled the business toward $1 billion. At HP and Micro Focus, she exceeded revenue targets for a $700 million public sector business. She's widely regarded as a navigator, a leader known for her authentic, people-focused, outcome-driven approach and deep commitment to public sector innovation, digital transformation, and expanding access to technology. She's also built her proprietary leadership model, the Executive Elevation Model, and now works with leaders and organizations to navigate complexity, drive measurable impact, and thrive throughout change. We connected on LinkedIn, I think it was. And within moments, I knew just based on the conversations we had just in Messenger, we hit it off. We have a lot of synergies and we started talking about the multi-hyphenate thing. How so many of us, especially in midlife, are pivoting in multiple directions at once and how the conventional wisdom we were taught, pick a lane, be great, just doesn't hold up anymore. So Teddra, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Amira. I'm excited to be here.
Me too. I'd love to start with your story. So you spent 25 years plus in corporate leadership at some of the biggest names in tech. You've driven a ton of transformation. When did you first realize that you weren't just going to be one thing?
On some level, I think I always knew it wasn't just going to be one thing. I tell people often that I kind of tripped and fell into tech. So even that wasn't the intention, but it was probably in my very first role in tech, a company I spent almost 9 years at and had over 5 different roles during that time period, worked for a lot of different people. But what that time period showed me is that picking a lane wasn't going to serve me for the long run in terms of the career that I was trying to build, even at those very early stages, at the beginning of my first real solid roles in the tech space. So what I really did is chose not just one lane, but kind of connecting lanes, if you will. So focusing in and working in and the go-to-market area of business really gave me a lot of different opportunities, a lot of different lanes that really did connect, but gave me the opportunity to have a lot of different types of experience that really served as the foundation for this 25 plus years that I've spent in technology.
That's awesome. So I'm just curious, when you were climbing, the corporate ladder, were you already thinking about what you'd build on your own, or did that come a little bit later?
I think that evolved for sure. In the beginning, it definitely was not something that I thought. I don't think I was too literal about it. Definitely planning in the short term, and everybody tries to have their 5-year plan. But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, I don't think that at that point I really knew exactly where all of this was going to take me.
Isn't that crazy? I think about that too. When I started working, I think I've always had like the entrepreneurial mindset where I was like, this is a great idea. And it's funny. I always say this to people. It's hard for me to realize that people don't think the exact same way that I do. And so when I think from an entrepreneurial side, I'm like, doesn't this make sense to you? Like, why wouldn't you be thinking about it this way? And people are like, one, it's not my dream. Two, it's not anything that I'm interested in. And I think that's one of the hardest things I've had to come to terms with, I think, is just recognizing it's a great thing, but not everybody thinks the same way that I do, especially when it comes to wanting to own a business, owning a business, any of those things. So it's just interesting. So you talk about being a navigator leader. What does that mean for you?
Uh, For me, that has meant finding opportunity in chaos, having the ability to see the forest for the trees. Insert analogy, but really, it's being able to operate and to most importantly, I think, lead in the face of tremendous ambiguity. The role that I mentioned, that was my start in the tech space, really set the pace for me very early on of what change was going to be like, and that was likely the only thing that was ever going to be constant. The only thing that I could ever truly count on is there would be more change. It became a real hallmark of my leadership. And when I moved into people leadership later, it's something I tell people when they're a part of my teams from a leadership perspective. It's something I share with folks that I coach, is that the spoiler alert is there will always be change, personally and professionally. So
Yeah,
embracing it, I think, is what has served me the best.
for sure. So when we talk about the multi-hyphenate in life, it's like the heart of everything. You're a board member, you're a founder, you're an executive coach, you're a thought leader. What does a typical work week look like for you? Like, how do you decide where your energy goes?
Yeah. Still, after all this time, I'd say no week is the same. And that's kind of how I like it.
Yeah.
I like things to be multifaceted and have found a lot of success in doing that. But my work really, what I try to do is establish a few anchors.
Mm.
And so focusing in on, what's the work that's going to drive revenue? What's the work that's driving impact now?
Yeah.
What's the work that is building long-term equity, and equity can mean a lot of different things in that scenario. That could be board work that I'm focused in on. It could be financial investments, and things of the like as an investor that I'm working towards. But then the other anchor primary, I would also say, is the work that keeps me grounded. Right. And so early on in career, I don't know if this is true for you, but it's definitely true for me. In the beginning of the career, it's hard not to center everything around money, frankly. Right. And
Yeah.
that's the fulfillment of all things. That's the, if I just get this many zeros behind, this
Yeah.
number, then everything will be great. And this is what I'm working towards. And I think reaching this midlife stage personally, but also from a career standpoint, has shown me it's a whole lot more out there to consider
Yeah.
than just money. And so, the work that keeps me grounded isn't always the work that quote unquote pays me the best.
Yeah, that's very, very true. I think it took me a long time to recognize that. And it's hard, I think, especially as we're, going through and getting things, recognizing that, I need money to be able to live a certain way and to be able to get things. So I think it clouds it for a while. But once you get through the weeds a little bit, to look back and say there's a different way that we can do things, I think is better.
Yeah, I try to focus all of that around outcomes, right? And you talked about, where does the energy go? The energy goes to aligning, what are the outcomes that fall into, all of those different anchors. And there are a lot of things that are important to do, but if
Yeah.
they don't align with
Yeah.
the outcome I'm trying to achieve, or the
Yeah.
season, frankly, that I'm in,
Yeah.
then it's not something I can pour energy into.
I think when we talk about your coaching, I think that kind of fits into it. Do you have systems that keep you from feeling like you're constantly not context switching? And I think you specialize in a lot of this system work.
Yeah, absolutely. And gosh, this last year, transitioning into, even more so from an entrepreneurial perspective,
Hmm.
and then at the same time, the continued evolution of AI and what that can bring to us in the way of productivity, etc., has really become even more so the foundation of just that, right? The systems that are available, the systems that I build, whether those are processes that are based on technology or processes that are based on people and developing frameworks around whatever it is that we're trying to accomplish, having a system is paramount to ensuring that just, what we just talked about, the outcomes and what you're focused on. If you're focused on the right things, if you're chasing the right outcomes, if you're doing things that are going to get you to where it is that you're trying to go. Because otherwise, there are so many distractions.
For sure.
Some that we create ourselves,
Yeah.
and so many more that, right, are just coming at us from so many different angles. And so focusing in on, and this is definitely my tech upbringing, if you will, but the people process technology piece, looking at things from that lens has always kept me honest, I think, in terms of, are the right systems in place to keep these things moving? And the system that's right for technology may not be the right system for a person, for a team, for, an outcome that you're trying to achieve.
I think that's what drew me to you when I first was looking at things. I'm very, it's funny. Systems doesn't necessarily mean rigid. And so I think the way I work is very much, I work very well with systems once I understand what system works for me. And again, realizing that just because it works for me doesn't mean it works for everybody else. But now that I've got my companies, I need to put in place what works for me. And I think I was trying to get other people to say, "Hey, what works for you?" And then it was confusing me, and then it was just too much because I was trying to please everybody. And I think that's where I was struggling before, and also thinking that if I have to have a system, that means I need to be here at 9 o'clock, and then I have to do this at 9:30. I actually work better that way. If I have a system and know what needs to be done and know that I need to follow it, I actually do work better that way. It's just me getting my brain
Yeah.
into the that I need to follow this system. But at the end of the day, I'm much more accomplished when I do it that way.
Mhm. Yeah, there's this idea around systems thinking, right?
Yeah.
That we really do have to apply. And I've been excited, I think, lately, again, around AI, that so many people are talking about the systems thinking approach that's
Mhm.
necessary to really get the most out of AI. Because otherwise, you can automate anything, but if you don't
Yeah.
have the right system or process in place, I tell people you're just automating chaos. You're just making something that didn't work well before work, run faster. That doesn't mean
Yep.
that you're really putting in, a system that's going to benefit you.
I love that. I like that a lot because I'm very much the kind that will, and I think this is what drove me, probably drove other people crazy. I think you and I had the conversation where I said I was bringing on a virtual assistant. And I think, again, my brain is so all over the place that I would get all these systems in place and then I would send it to her. And I would say, okay, we're going to put this in place. And then 2 days later, I'd say, okay, now we're going to do this. And I'd have these great frameworks and these great systems in place. And she was like, what are you doing? I was like, this is great. I've got systems now, but I've got 15 different systems and
Yep.
none of them are working. So I think being able to have a better laser focus and say, this is what you need to do and stick with it and don't touch anything else and don't go to try to create anything else and just do this was really hard for me. I'm getting there.
It's a process in and of itself. Believe me, I'm there with you.
So let's talk about the midlife shift. So how has being in midlife changed the way you show up across different roles? Has anything shifted for you personally or professionally in midlife?
One thing it's almost dispelling a myth because and what I'll share, because I've read articles recently and a lot of conversation, especially with women, around this change of this period of time, right? And does
Mhm.
that mean that, because we start talking about boundaries and the things that we need to be putting in place to make our lives better, to make us more productive, to focus in more on the things that matter most to us. But all of those things can be true, but that doesn't mean that your ambition has shrunk. Midlife didn't shrink my ambition. I think it's changed my standards. Hopefully, upgraded them. I think it's upgraded my standards.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, and it's refined my focus. Back to my comment earlier about how money was kind of like that North Star at the beginning of my career. It's
Yeah.
definitely refined my focus on what is most important to me. The working to live,
Yeah.
not living to work
Yeah.
is a real piece of this, because especially for women, we're natural nurturers. We I think are multi-hyphenate almost by
Yeah.
default. If you happen to also be, a parent, a wife, a mother, all of these different things that make us who we are. But getting here definitely did not shrink my ambition. It's just channeled it, I think, in different ways.
I say the same thing, and I think we might have talked about this, but my husband had said a while ago, she's on this women empowerment kick. And I said, I'm not on a women's empowerment kick at all. What I've realized is as I've gotten older and I've matured and I've, become a business owner and I've done all the things that I'm doing and had more access to people and had more conversations with people about what they do or don't want, I realized what I will or won't tolerate anymore, come up with a better way of expressing myself, which I probably wasn't the best at, years ago. And I'm able to get my point across. And it seems to be working because people are now like, we like this. We appreciate that you're saying these things. I just had a workout this morning at a gym with a young woman. She's probably, I don't know, late 20s, early 30s. And we were talking about boundaries and things. And I said, what I want is to be able to show you guys that you should have boundaries and you can have boundaries. And I don't want you to get to be like me at 52 and say, okay, now I'm realizing this is what I could have done 10, 15 years ago. I want you to realize at the age you are now as a young business owner that this is how the things that you can ask for. These are the things that you can push towards. She was talking about becoming certified as a woman owned business. And she said, my attorney told me, or my CPA told me that I can't do it right now. I have to wait because he doesn't want to do the paperwork right now. I have to wait, I don't know, 6 or 7 months. I said, yes, you can. She's like, well, no, I can't. I said, no, you can. I said, on paper, it says you need to wait 12 months, whatever. But if you've got a contract and there's the ability for you to do this, you can
Yeah.
actually do it now. And she sent me a text and she said, thank you so much. She goes, I never would have known this. And I said, that's just me being a little pushy and just saying, no, I'm going to push back a little bit. And I'm going to say, are you sure that this isn't the way it needs to be? And I think that's what I want to help teach, especially women, a little bit of pushback because it's okay for my husband to push back. The law
Exactly.
enforcement guy, he can push back and it's okay for him to do it. I do it. And what does it look like when I do it? It's
Yeah.
taken in a completely different context, I think.
And I love that you're sharing that you don't have to struggle your way for years, decades, et cetera, to reach the point where it's like, okay, now you're worthy of having boundaries. You've
Yeah.
worked long enough, you've survived
Yep.
long enough, right?
Exactly.
Right. I want people to thrive throughout their careers and not just, scrape and struggle to from peak to peak. It
Yep.
doesn't have to be that way. And especially for young women, because I don't think it's not something that people were telling me when I was
Right.
right at that
For sure.
age and stage of life, I'll call it.
Yeah. What about when you look at relationships, friendships, partnerships, family dynamics? Have any of those shifted at all as you've stepped more fully into the multi hyphenate identity?
Very much so. And I think it's from a
Okay.
friendship and colleagues standpoint, and I say those two words intentionally, because you don't work this long in your career, you don't live this long and interact with people this long without having a lot of overlap in that friendship and colleagues thing.
Right. Right.
And so when you look at the different identities that we embrace at different stages of our lives, whether it's career or titles, all of these different things, that can really influence the way that you interact, the way that you are perceived
Yeah.
by your quote unquote friends and colleagues. And that can change, right? And, on a really real level, not everybody's happy for you, right?
Right. Right.
Not everybody's gonna be happy for you when you make a switch, when you make a pivot, you're doing different things. And so that is as I have gotten further into entrepreneurship, further into career stages, right? Moving early on in career from an individual contributor to leader to people leader, first and second, all of these different
Yep.
types of roles and the relationships change and along the way. Some of them break. If you're lucky, you've got the right ones in place. They bend, right? Because they're going to change over the
Yeah.
years. But those are the ones I think that you want to keep. But that's been something I've definitely thought a lot about, I think, over this last maybe 6 months or so, the change in some of those dynamics.
I had a conversation with a woman probably 2 months ago, and we were talking about the first thing. It was we were talking about some business things, and the very first thing she said to me was, "You're evolving from a business standpoint, and whatever it is that you're doing, I want you to keep doing it." She said, "But there's a lot of people around you. You're going to start changing who you're surrounding yourself with, and the
Mhm.
people that you thought were up for your best interests might not necessarily be." And I'm not saying to just dismiss them or stop talking to them, but they might not appreciate what it is that you're doing. And I've
Mhm.
found that in the last, I would say 2 months, I've realized that, but I'm realizing that the people that I am surrounding myself with or the people that I am connecting with, I have much more in common with, and it's a different dynamic. And so I'm realizing this. I don't want to say I'm manifesting, but I am definitely realizing it. And it's kind of sad in a way, people that you really thought, like I thought we were, of course, we're still friends. I thought we were better friends, but just like the snide comments or I had a girlfriend who said, we were talking about something and she said, well, it's not like you work at Amazon because I was busy. It's not like you run Amazon, is what she said, because I had back to back meetings. And it's just how some people try to devalue maybe what it is that you do because you're in a different phase. And so you might be moving or acting differently because I'm trying
Mhm.
to do, things. It's just interesting watching.
Yeah, yeah, it is. And I wonder if you found this as well, but as you do different things, as you launch different things, whether that's a business or a campaign, whatever it is, right? Who supports you in that, right?
Yeah.
And finding those that you thought would have often don't,
Yeah.
right? And those that at the same time, though, and perhaps that's the beauty in it all of the balance, is that those that you might never even have thought would have taken a second look at what
Yeah.
you were doing
Yeah.
are right in the front row. So, life surprises you. You know,
It balances it out.
it does. It
So,
does.
if we're talking about corporate and entrepreneurship and that transition, I want to dig into that just for a minute. So, a lot of women are still in corporate and they're thinking about what's next, or they're thinking about what the next level might be for them. Some are already building something on the side, others or post corporate, and are trying to figure out how to lead without the infrastructure that they had before. You've done both. You've done executive leadership at massive companies, and now the founder of your own firm. What did you underestimate about the transition?
Say the isolation, because when you are in large companies or frankly just in any role in corporate where you're surrounded by, especially you're in your leadership role, you've got teams and lots of different folks contributing collaboratively to ideas and the work, et cetera. And so when you're on your own, you're often very much so on your own, right? And so it's just even the banter, the ideas, right? That part that can be
Yeah.
a bit isolating.
Yeah.
And so, but that doesn't mean you unpack and live there, right? You seek
Right.
that out, but you do it in different ways. And so I think that's probably an area that I maybe underestimated a bit and was able to see that very, very early on and figure out, okay, well, it doesn't mean that I don't have the ability to collaborate and have this information share and idea sharing and collaborating. I just need to go about it differently. And so that's when I really made sure to tap into almost the processes or the systems that were already in place for me, whether that's some of the other organizations that I belong to. I'm a member of Chief, National Women's Organization of Senior Executive Women, and very, very strong ties to that group and a cohort I meet with every month. Some of my board work that's very much centered around women and impact and community. Like, so you find your collaboration, you find your community in a lot of different ways. And for me, overcoming that isolation was about figuring out, all right, how does this change the consulting and the client work that I'm doing? How do I need to be more intentional about getting that collaboration going?
Chief sounds really interesting, and we'll put that info in the show notes too for people to be able to refer back to that because that's a really great. I've been looking at a lot of the information on LinkedIn as well, and it seems like it's got a lot of good info. Do you want to talk about it quick?
Sure. I'm still super excited about Chief. And I say still because March, I'm actually on International Women's Day, is my 5th anniversary
Okay.
in the organization. They have major chapters around the country, but I'm a founding member of the Washington, D.C. Area. And so that means I was part of the very first group of women to join the organization at that time. And the professional development, the community building, leadership sharing the gosh, just even a wonderful article and press that I read about multi-hyphenate and what we're talking about here today. I feel like I some of the first conversations I had around just that was as being a part of the chief community. And so they have been integral to my growth as an executive,
Yeah.
and my growth as a woman in corporate, but also very much so into this transition into the portfolio career or entrepreneurship and holding all of these different titles that make me a multi-hyphenate. There's a whole category, if you will, a whole group of women as a part of Chief that are on a very same similar.
I love that. So, again, speaking of multi hyphenate, can you tell me what the difference is between multi hyphenate and scattered?
I think that comes back to just that, to the systems piece that we talked about, to ensuring that you're putting something in place that's really going to last, and that you're focused on again the outcomes, because the worst thing you could do, I think, is be activity focused,
Yeah.
and then you get trapped in thinking that movement and motion is progress. It's
Yeah.
not necessarily, right. And we could get really caught up in that. I think that is what I would call scatter, where being multi-hyphenate, I think there's a through line, right? There's always a connection point. What I talked about earlier about not staying in my own lane, but finding the lanes that connect it, right? What is still the through line? What are the things that I'm working towards that are still headed towards that same North Star, or are
Right.
still contributing to what it is that I'm trying to accomplish overall, whatever that goal is. And as long as it still feeds that, I think that's focusing in on being a multi-hyphenate, but doing so in a way that's integrated, and not just adding more things to the plate for the sake of doing more activity. I think that's the definition of scattered.
I like
Multi-hyphenate, I think, has to be a strategy, and being scattered is probably a symptom rather than a strategy.
I like that. That's a good one. To remember that. So when we talk about what I do, a lot of what I do is boundary work, and it's could be felt as a business strategy is something that I talk about it a lot. But it's not just a personal preference, I feel like. So from your perspective, how do you maintain boundaries across multiple roles, even when everything feels important at the time?
Well, I love the last part, which is that when everything feels important. One of the things I would always remind my leaders, and now the folks that that I coach, is that a lot of things are important.
Yeah.
Not everything's urgent. Um, Not everything requires your attention, right, at that very moment in time. Being a multi hyphenate, I think, by design can sound like, all right, I'm going in all of these different directions at one time. It doesn't have to be that. It can be very coordinated. It should be. It should be designed.
Yeah.
And so, those boundaries, all of those things are so incredibly important. And that's where the sustainability piece, I think, comes in. And that's just as we need to be intentional about the work that we're doing. The sustainability piece needs to be designed into what we're doing. That's the only thing that's going to make it something that is truly sustainable.
Yeah.
But I talk a lot about building things that are going to last, and more importantly, things that will outlast me, right? Whether that's me in a role as a part of a company, whether that's me in terms of the impact I can make on someone that I'm working with in a coaching capacity, in a consulting capacity. I want to build things that sustain, things that last, and leaving a mark, if you will.
I like that. I like that. We talked about isolation a little bit earlier, and I
Mhm.
know a lot of people are juggling a lot of roles, the side
Yeah.
businesses, caregiving we're like in the sandwich generation where a lot of us have kids or, young adults, and then we've got our parents who are, on the other end, and we're kind of stuck in the middle. So a lot of people are basically living as multi-hyphenates, whether they choose to or not. What do you think makes sense, and why do you think it's so hard for people to understand the full scope of what we're doing? Like when we talked about my friend earlier who was like, it's not like you're Bill Gates or Mark Bezos or anybody else along those lines. Why is this so hard to make people understand? And do we need to really make them understand?
I think we really need to make them understand.
Yeah.
However, one of my favorite analogies is the iceberg theory. And so this idea that, right, the world rewards us having very simple labels or titles or understanding what they can see. And so the
Yeah.
iceberg theory is all built around what's above that waterline is what you can see. That's all the
Yep.
success. Those are all of the things up there at the top. But what's below the waterline,
Yep.
that's where, right? And we love to celebrate everything above, but it's what's below the surface that you realize there's a whole lot more iceberg under there.
Yep.
That's where the invisible load that I think that we're all carrying, where that actually lives, right? That's where the things that you don't know about what someone is carrying or going through, or whether they're caring, caregiving, and whether it's a parent, a child, someone else in the family, community impacts and leadership, and the
Yeah.
emotional labor and mental bandwidth it takes to just keep
Yeah.
everything moving, whatever everything is for you or me, or another person. And so I think that's where so much of that comes from, is we're
Yeah.
so wrapped up in what we can see. We know we've got things below the waterline for ourselves, and a little reminder that everybody else has got their iceberg too,
Yeah,
would probably do us do us all a lot of good.
for sure. You know, one thing I've been sitting with lately, and this is kind of a little bit off, but when you're balancing multiple things, how do you introduce yourself? How do you talk about who you are without it sounding like a resume? Because I know sometimes I'll talk to people and they'll say, "Well, what do you do?" And I'll say, "Oh, I've got D5 consulting." And then, "Oh, yep, I also have my social media company. Oh, I also, we have our not for profit." How do you encompass who you are without it coming across that way?
Yeah. Well, I chuckle a little bit because I live in the Northern Virginia, DC area. I've been in big tech for 25 plus years. And for the majority of that time, the US government, including state and local entities across the country, were my primary customer.
Yep.
And we joke in DC, you can't have a conversation just meeting someone without, what do you do?
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
A key
Exactly.
part of that conversation. So it's not unusual for a lot of these combos to sound like resume discussions. But what I try to do is go back to what that through line is. And for me, that's been working at the intersection of technology and government and leadership for all of this time. And so much of what I do feeds into one or more of those areas. It can quickly start to sound a little resume like, but I
Right.
try to hone in on, depending on who I'm talking to, right? What's most relevant for that person, for that situation, for that conversation, what it is that we're trying to accomplish, or if it's just a simple, opportunity to meet someone and see, what commonality may exist. For more often than not, is so much more than
Yeah.
than we consider at first.
I agree. 100%. 100%. So, when you look at things, do you have like a team, contractors, advisors, or do you have a lot of things that are automated or eliminated entirely when you talk about the infrastructure behind the multi-hype?
I have a lot of different systems that I'm using in the background. Continually working to better integrate those systems because, to your point, I think earlier, we can get excited by, especially some of the cool automations and things that are
Yeah.
possible, and then go back and think, well, it's faster, but did I need it to be? Is
Exactly.
was this the piece of the puzzle that needed this? And so I think that's been a really key part of it for me, but that's a continuous improvement area at the same time, right? Is to take advantage of what's available,
Yeah.
but integrate it in a way that is continuing to move the needle for me, whether that's in terms of reclaiming time, freeing me up to do other things. I have another venture that I'm working towards that doesn't sit at the intersection of technology and government, but
Mm.
feeds that desire to have other streams of income, have other businesses
Okay.
that operate without me needing to be the day-to-day operator. And
Okay.
so that's yet another area of this that I think increases the multi-hyphenate on some level, but does so in a really intentional way and in a way that will be sustainable because it isn't built on the very finite number of hours that I have each and every day.
I like that. I like that. We're getting to the end. So I want you to, if you could, can you share a real life moment or yours or a client's where setting a boundary or making a strategic choice allowed you to lead more effectively across different spaces, or where not setting a boundary cost you something?
That's probably the more vulnerable piece, not setting a boundary that definitely cost me something. One of the biggest wake up calls for me in terms of kind of hitting the wall, burnout, giving way too much, pouring for an almost empty cup, insert
Yep.
analogy. Um,
Yep.
came for me in 2024 with not a serious, but a life altering health issue that came up for me that really stopped me in my tracks and was a reminder, number one, that I'm not in control of all the things
Yeah.
as much as I would like to believe. But I truly believe that I reached the point that I reached because I was giving
Oh,
so much of myself and not pouring enough back into myself
okay.
to be able to sustain all of the things that were on my plate. And so that major wake up call led me very, very clearly to where I am today, career wise, to the business that I've launched, businesses that I've launched and the work that I'm doing. And I think a renewed focus around just that, the pieces of the puzzle that I like to look at in that way that mattered the very
Yeah.
most. Because what I really built since leaving corporate was pulling the pieces of the puzzle that I love the most, building
Okay.
and leading people and still having the ability to help grow businesses and revenue and all those different things, but
Mhm.
do so by not sacrificing myself in the process.
I like that. I like that a lot. So we always end our podcast with a reflection for the week. So I want whoever's listening or watching, because this one's actually video, write down all the roles that you're holding right now, not just professional. Everything from being a partner, being a parent, a friend, a leader, etc. Any of those things. Then ask yourself. Which of these feels like you're trying to fit someone else's version of success, which I think is a big one. I think a lot of times people just always want to compare. I'm sorry. And which ones feel like you're leading from who you really are? So I think that's a good one. Do you have any reflective questions that you want to give your clients or that you would give your clients during leadership work?
To ensure that you've started whatever you're working towards with the outcome in mind. I think often a lot of my clients that I work with are focused in on what the next level is that they're trying to achieve career wise, whether that's promotion, moving from individual contributor into leadership roles, et cetera. And it can feel like visibility is important at all costs.
Yeah.
That isn't necessarily going to serve if you're not being visible in the right ways, if the work that you're doing isn't being highlighted in the right way. And so, I always center people back on ensuring that you've properly defined the outcome that you're trying to achieve.
Mhm.
Only then can we really map out what are the steps that it's going to take to get there.
I like that. I like that. So, Tedra, where can people find you if they want to learn more about your work or how can they connect with you?
Sure. On LinkedIn, for sure, it's Teddra Thomas Burgess, and then Chasing Outcomes on other major platforms. So Chasing Outcomes on LinkedIn, Instagram, as well as chasingoutcomes.com.
Okay. And if someone's listening and thinking, I actually need executive coaching, or I need to look at systems, or I need someone who understands leadership and complexity, what's the best way to start a conversation with you? Because I know a lot of times people get on LinkedIn and you get those messages where the minute you get a LinkedIn request, you get something in your inbox. And I always I delete all those because they're annoying.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say start a conversation. I really look at my brand, if you will, of executive leadership coaching is being more so partnership based. It is something that I relish in that I have the ability to really customize person to person. And so
Yeah.
what that means is that, I jump in and roll up my sleeves and whether that's helping to craft a presentation right
Mhm.
alongside the person that I'm coaching. It's not just a readout or a report out on did you do all the things that I asked you to do in the last session. It really is a partnership that's built
Yeah.
around just that, the outcomes they're trying to achieve. And so for me, the first step to building that partnership is very simply a conversation. Never anything too heavy or pushy that sometimes we do receive in those LinkedIn emails.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
But I always tell folks that's really all it takes is that conversation to see if there's a fit and whether I feel like I'm the right person to help someone to try to achieve their goals. I think that's a key part of it. I
Yeah.
never go in any conversation thinking without a shadow of a doubt, I'm the person. Because if
Yeah.
I'm not, I'd much rather that individual find the person that's going to help them achieve their goals.
For sure. I love that. So, as always, for the listeners, you can always find my journal on the shift itself. It's on Amazon. All my boundary tools and resets are also in my standout store. And the links for everything will be in the show notes. So, the way we end it is the same as always. No neat wrap up here, just another week, another layer. I'll be here until next time.